I was extremely surprised to see some simple HTML5 parsing with Symfony DOM Crawler take 100 milliseconds while analyzing a Magento 2 store. The fix in this case brought down the performance to roughly 10 milliseconds, an order of magnitude faster. And this makes for a great story to tell about us developers making assumptions about the performance of code while writing it, and then completely misjudging how long it takes. And a usual disclaimer when investigating performance problems: it's not a matter of assigning blame to who introduced the bottleneck. We are here to learn from them for the future. Moin, I am Benjamin and my work is focused on PHP performance topics for the last 10 years, helping thousands of developers, companies and open source projects along the way. As developers, we usually don't have the performance numbers available for every line of code that we write. So we learn to live with heuristics and assumptions to do this on the fly while we write code. These heuristics ticked off my alarm bells when analyzing a Magento 2 store. Tideways Profiler showed the module link preload from Yireo. I came across its link parser at link headers from response method, and it constructs a Symfony DOM Crawler instance with the HTML of the response taking 100 milliseconds. This is entirely unexpected for me, as my assumption was that it's using DOM document under the hood, a PHP extension that is written in C, and even with a very large HTML response, it should not take that long, maybe up to 10 milliseconds. That is my feeling how long this code should take, based on my experience building PHP code for the last 25 years. And because we don't have live profiling running for every line that we write, developers learn in their career by experience to estimate how much time various functions and algorithms roughly take. Let's say PHP string or array manipulation functions take 0.001 millisecond, roughly in my experience. A file system call 10 times more, 0.01 milliseconds. Then the next order of magnitude may be some Redis call to memory, 0.1 milliseconds. And then database queries, let's say an SQL query with a where clause based on primary key, 1 millisecond, SQL query with a where clause on different columns, maybe some complexity, around 10 milliseconds, and then SQL query with a where clause on columns and no index, let's say 100 milliseconds or even many seconds, and so on and so on. I have so many different assumptions in my mind about how long should things take. They pop up once I write the code. It's like a background process running in my mind, evaluating constantly 1 milliseconds here, 100 milliseconds there, and so on, to get a rough estimate how long a controller, a command or something will run in the end. So the question to me was, why is the Symfony DOM Crawler so slow? And you can quickly find out by going a bit deeper in the stack in the profiler, to reveal that the actual parsing is done by the mastermind's HTML5 parser. Go down here, crawler construct, crawler add content, add HTML content, parse HTML string, crawler parse HTML5, and then from there we see HTML5 parse, and tokenizer parse is called from the mastermind's namespace, and the DOM document is not actually called at all. This is not how I remember Symfony DOM Crawler working when I used it a few years back, and that would prove me right. The optional support for HTML5 based parsing was added in 2019 in PR 29306, and it was made the default only with Symfony 7.0 in 2022 with PR 44170. So in the last 3 years that I haven't used it a lot or didn't need it to be like super fast, maybe I came across this, but it wasn't relevant enough, and now I saw it for this customer hitting really hard. Before this change, Symfony DOM Crawler would use the PHP extension DOM document under the hood, which only parses HTML4 compliant, and that created a lot of subtle and annoying bugs when parsing HTML5. And so it makes sense that the Symfony team fixes these parsing errors by introducing a HTML5 parser. But the problem is when that parser is 10 times slower than the original code. And this caused other people to report issues on the Symfony project, pointing this performance change out. This parser activates itself only when the beginning of the content starts with the HTML5 doc type, and when the use HTML5 parser flag to the constructor is true, which since 2022 is the default. Back to the method add link headers from response. So it doesn't have to be 100% perfect. We don't need to perfectly add all styles, scripts and images using a preload tag. The reason for this is that the browser will eventually catch those anyways, parsing HTML5 and then load them. It may take a little bit longer. However, using this 10 times slower parser for HTML5, what we are doing essentially is we are affecting the backend performance to render the time to first byte. So this is a critical pass in the performance. It affects the Google Web Vitals quite negatively, and 100 milliseconds are just not worth this simple performance optimization. The browser will not catch up this 100 milliseconds it's on its own. So what we can do now is we write ourselves a little test script. I did that here. So I'm bootstrapping the Magento code base that's necessary to be able to run the link parser with all its dependencies. Then I put HTML code into the dummy response object. I use that from the customer that I talked at the beginning from with the 100 milliseconds slowdown. And then I run the link parser, and then I check how many lines in the response contain preloading. So this way I see when I change that to run with something with a different kind of parser, if the result is similar or it doesn't find any results anymore. So then what I'm doing is I run Tideways Profiler, and the reason for this is that I want to see the performance in the worst case. So let's open that. We go to the call graph and we look for the link parser parse method. So it only takes 67 milliseconds here, so it's faster, probably because on my MacBook Pro M4 the CPU code doing here is just way faster than on a server that has maybe more generic hardware. So still 66 milliseconds are way too long. Going through the slowest pass, we still see it's crawler construct related, and we can go through it and see further down, it's using the masterminds library. So that is what we wanted to show. Let's go back to the code, and then in the crawler, we can see we can disable use HTML5 parser. So let's do that. Use HTML. I'm using named arguments here because it has 2 additional arguments that would otherwise interfere. So I'm doing this change, running the profiler again, and then I can directly jump to compare it against the previous trace. And I can see it's running much faster, so 139 milliseconds to 193. Let's check in the call graph. The reason for this, tokenizer attribute, 6,000 calls less. So this is the biggest improvement. And the reason for this essentially is that crawler construct, which is the entry point to the using of the DOM crawler, is now 52 milliseconds faster. And this is like the order of magnitude improvement that we were looking for and we were expecting. So with DOM document, if we look at the trace and look again for link parser pass, we see it's now 5 times faster than in the code before. And for like different setups and scenarios, I've seen this to be 10 times faster as well. So it's a very big performance change to use the Mastermind's code versus using DOM document. So are we done now? Not really. Let's look at the code again and see if it catches the same amount of links. It does that. So from the feature perspective, at least for this HTML code, it produces the same response. However, PHP 8.4 added support for HTML5 parsing. So if we just upgrade that Magento 2 store to use PHP 8.4, we can make use of C-level based HTML5 parsing, and that would make the code again much faster. So what do we need to do to support that? Since the link preload module is generic code, we would need to check for the PHP version. So using the PHP parser, if PHP version ID is greater 8.4, and then we use that flag here. And then we should also check that Symfony is using a version that supports this change. This happens with the pull request 61475. It was merged last month, so in August 2025, and it will be included in Symfony 7.4 onwards. So we need to change the code to check for that. And you can do that using the Composer package installed versions. And then you can say get version of Symfony DOM Crawler. And then I need to check that version compare installed versions is bigger than 7.4 or equals 7.4. So in this case, I will use the HTML5 parser for the crawler. And in all the other cases, so with lower PHP versions, in the link parser, in this preload module, we use the HTML4 based parser with all the caveats of the parser being not as correct as possible. The next problem is that in Symfony 8.0, this parameter will go away. So we need to make an additional change here and check that we only do that if installed version compare installed version get version from Symfony Crawler is, and it's always weird to check those numbers, it returns 1, 0 or -1. So if the left one is smaller than the right one, so 8.000, in that case we want to use it with the flag, and in the other case we want to or have to use it with the original code, because otherwise it will create a fatal error because the argument doesn't exist anymore under that name, and the code will not like this. So this way we have it working. Let's check again. We call tileways run, and we can see the output is still much lower than in the case without this fix, and we can verify in the code that we are running DOM document load HTML, and we are not using the Mastermind's code. So it constructs it, but it's not using the code. And the link parser parse method is also quite fast compared to the slow code we looked at before. This story shows how the assumptions we make about performance can quickly be off by an order of magnitude or even more, and that we should verify them with actual production numbers every once in a while using a production-ready profiler such as Tideways. If you like to stay informed about PHP performance topics, please subscribe to this channel on YouTube or subscribe to the newsletter. The link is in the description. Bye!